All right. Well, my clock says 11 Western time, 2 o'clock Eastern. So we'll go ahead and get started. We've got a very full agenda today, and I want to make sure that we have time to incorporate everyone. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. You are at the July meeting for the Recycling is Infrastructure 2 campaign. There's been a lot of exciting development since the last time we met, as well as a number of new people that are joining us today. So thank you and welcome. Our agenda for today is we'll start with just the background and updates on things that have happened since our last meeting. Gary Liss, the Vice President of Zero Waste USA and coordinator of the Recycling is Infrastructure 2 campaign, will be leading us off. Then Bob Gedert will share with us the American Recycling Infrastructure Plan. And Jeremy Drake will go over the impacts analysis of that plan, and Ruth Abbey will lead us into the discussion. Finally, Gary will come back and summarize and provide us with the next steps. As I mentioned, we do have a large number of people joining us today. So we're going to ask you to keep your mute on unless you're speaking, and use the chat function to ask questions of our presenters or other participants. So to help us keep organized, if you could help us, if you have a specific question for one of the presenters, go ahead and put that at the start of your question. If it's a comment, let us know it's just a comment. If you are a member of the organizing committee and would like to speak, you can use the raise hand function in Zoom, and also be useful in your request to post that in chat with a brief summary so that we can organize our discussions accordingly. So thank you so much. That will help us stay organized today. We will be saving the chat, so please use it liberally to introduce yourselves, to share resources and comments throughout our discussion. And we will save that and have that available after today's meeting. If you wish to change the view, it's in the upper right-hand side. If you keep all of the videos in a column towards the right, the slides are set up so that you'll be able to see all of the content on the slides throughout the presentation. If you need any help with that, just send me a chat and I can help you offline as we get started. Well, again, we do have a very full agenda, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Gary, so that we can get started.
Thanks, Jill. That's Jill Danello from greeneducation.us. We appreciate you hosting the last couple of webinars for the Recycling is Infrastructure 2 campaign. I just want to take a couple minutes to update people. Since our last webinar on June 22nd, there's been some really exciting developments, including June 21st, National Recycling Coalition received a copy of the Senator Joe Manchin America Recycling Infrastructure Act, which is an exciting development to see that. There's been other recycling infrastructure acts that we've talked about in previous webinars as well. June 24th, just after our 22nd webinar, the president announced a bipartisan deal, and they've been working on that to finalize the details since then. The bipartisan deal did not address recycling per se. If we go back, Bob, but the bipartisan deal is looking like it's coming together. There's some sticking points as always, but we'll hear from the rest of our organizing committee later on in the discussion, any updates that they'd like to share. I did note that the Senate Energy and Natural Resources hearing had comments about recycling infrastructure particularly, by Senator Joe Manchin, which was great to see. July 16th, the Compost Act was introduced. This was the long-awaited introduction we were hearing about from our partners at Institute for Local Self-Reliance, Brenda Platt particularly. And July 16th, it was introduced. So major progress there. And we're excited about the $2 billion over 10 years that act proposes. So now on the campaign updates, because of the new developments with the bipartisan deal being announced June 24th, instead of going to during the recess to focus on a meeting with Congress people during the recess to advocate for recycling as infrastructure too, we focused on the development of the plan. And we compiled the details from 4 proposals initially, now a total of 5 proposals that we looked at in detail. Jeremy Drake summarized those in a great spreadsheet, and then Bob Gedert put together the first draft, building off of what had been proposed already, adding in things that hadn't been addressed in some of the other plans, and then organizing them into a comprehensive overall American recycling infrastructure plan. We then circulated that to the steering committee, then the organizing committee, which are those people who attended our prior meetings since May of this campaign, and asked them to review and comment. One of the comments we got in was distinguishing between the physical infrastructure or the hard costs that people have been talking about on Capitol Hill as a particular interest to some of the congressional representatives and senators versus social or supportive legislation ideas. And so the plan's divided into those 2 categories. We changed the word social infrastructure to be infrastructure support policies and programs to highlight that you can invest just in the physical, or if you invest in these other support policies and programs, it will make the investment in the physical much more efficient and much more widely used. Jeremy Drake then did an impact analysis of what number of jobs and greenhouse gases could be reduced through these initiatives. And on July 15th, we released the plan to over 500 congressional staff, about 50 different media, and today is our first public presentation. So with that, we're going to hear most of the presentation will be by Bob Gedert, president of the National Recycling Coalition. Bob is one of the most knowledgeable advocates for reduce, reuse, recycle, and compost in America. He's worked at local and state government for nonprofits like the California Resource Recovery Association, and now as president of the National Recycling Coalition is helping us become more active in advocacy for reduce, reuse, recycle, and compost. So with that, here's Bob.
And thank you, Gary. Thanks for the update on how we got to where we are. And this American Recycling Infrastructure Plan is on the internet. It's accessible, and it was released on July 15th, sent to congressional staff and media. And that's what our intent was. That's our intended audience. But we wanted to make sure it's broadly advertised to all of you so that you can talk to your congressional staff and your local media. It has 50 initiatives. Its impact is $6.6 billion investment in the first year, but over the 3 years investment, $16.6 billion. The 50 initiatives work in synergy among themselves, and they fit together like an elaborate and assembled jigsaw puzzle. They can work separately, but they work more effectively together as effectively as a jigsaw puzzle. They were built on prior advocacy plans. Paying it forward, U.S. Food Loss and Waste Policy Action Plan, recommendations to reduce plastic pollution, priority plastic actions for President Biden's first year, and Compost Act. And as Gary had noted, the prior plans as submitted had missing elements. And so we added NRC plans and elements and initiatives to fit what we identified as holes. And we put that together and added up to 50 initiatives. The first year infrastructure added up to 10 initiatives and at $3.3 billion for the physical infrastructure and 40 initiatives, $3.3 billion for infrastructure support policies and programs. Carrie identified the difference between the two, physical and the social or the infrastructure support policies and programs. It's important to note, as Gary had noted, that the back half, the 40 initiatives, really do support the physical infrastructure and make all of the infrastructure projects work together in synergy with each other. Diving into the plan, I'd like to describe the projects that we're proposing. We have a breakout of the plan by reduce, reuse, recycle, and compost. The first section of the plan is physical infrastructure, as mentioned. And some of the projects, as identified on this slide, food reuse, warehouses, federal reuse and facilities, water refill stations, repair clinics. Just to identify one of those on the slide, authorize the EPA to administer a national grants program to establish reuse warehouses and reuse centers across the nation. So and $250 million in annual investment for 3 years, grants to local government or private sector investors. So that just gives you a sample idea of what we're talking about there. On the second set here, physical infrastructure, recycling and compost, cart-based collection, material recovery facilities, hub and spoke transfer, recycling for lithium-ion batteries, composting facilities. Many of these look pretty self-evident, like the cart investment. We're talking carts collection, 38 million residents to underserved communities across the nation at $1.34 billion. And this was originally proposed from the recycling partnership. Also in this note here is lithium-ion batteries and the investment in infrastructure, research development, and recycling opportunities for lithium-ion batteries. Not only is this important to MRFs who have fires from lithium-ion batteries, we're looking for an answer to that issue, but also for the electric car industry to support the growth of the electric car industry and finding a recycling answer to lithium-ion batteries. This is moving on to the infrastructure support category, reduce category, food loss partnerships, national EPR for difficult to recycle items, federal agency source reduction, stop subsidizing plastic producers. And it's of note, you'll see food loss throughout this plan. Food happens to be nearly a quarter of our waste stream going to the landfill. And so that's an item that's not lost on us. And we have many agenda items and initiatives on food loss here. EPR, direct EPA to establish a national EPR framework that embraces the precautionary principle of do not harm, where EPR can provide incentives to redesign products to eliminate toxins and potential human harm. Also, important note to stop subsidizing plastic producers, direct the Department of Energy to end all loan and guarantee finance and guaranteed financing programs that increase plastic production from extraction, pipeline storage to manufacturing and export. Our own government is supporting the plastics production and producers, and we're saying stop subsidizing that industry. Interesting also, carrying that same theme, stop subsidizing the chemical recycling program, stop subsidizing fossil fuel industries, and stop subsidizing the mining and extraction of manufacturing of products. And to give you an example, Congress should repeal oil depletion allowances and timber harvesting credits from the federal tax code. The recycling is disadvantaged as we subsidize the virgin products industry. Congress should direct the U.S. Treasury to eliminate all U.S. investments in fossil fuels and redirect those funds to climate change investments. All of these are important in the support of reducing our reliance on virgin products and increasing our support for recycling. And moving on, eliminate single-use plastics, replace the reusable products. This is a replacement and reducing our reliance on the single-use. Reduce plastics in ocean by U.S. government agencies. Our own agencies are polluting our oceans. We need to identify those leakages and reduce and eliminate. Increase disaster debris by waste prevention. And we have a committee, an NRC committee that's working on disaster debris, if you're interested in that. On the eliminate single-use plastics, direct, create and appoint a plastic pollution czar to coordinate plastic reduction efforts amongst federal agencies and internationally. Direct the head of each federal agency to ensure that it does not purchase single-use plastic products or allow them to be sold on federal property require each agency to submit a plan detailing what it will do to eliminate single-use plastic products. Infrastructure support, reduce pay-as-you-throw programming, refillable bottle grants to local states and communities, infrastructure use recycled products, comprehensive procurement guidelines, federal facilities requirements, of awareness campaigns to reduce food waste. Again, pay-as-you-throw programs, EPA has been involved in pay-as-you-throw back to the 1980s. And we're asking that Congress should direct US EPA to create a national pay-as-you-throw program with best practices in implementing pay-as-you-throw with federal waste contracts and grant funding to state and local governments to implement pay-as-you-throw programming throughout the country. We're looking at investing $100 million into those programs. On the refillable bottle market program, the Congress should direct the Department of Commerce and the US EPA to establish a national refillable market development grants program to encourage bottlers to create a bottle return system that utilizes the original bottle as a refillable rather than breaking the bottle and recycling the glass. Going back to those days of milk bottles and beer bottles and glass bottles being recycled through the original bottle, refillable bottles. Again, on infrastructure support, reuse, federal agencies use reuse systems rather than disposable systems. Infrastructure use, as the federal government gives out money for infrastructure projects, this is a requirement that all infrastructure projects use reuse systems rather than disposable systems. Reusable foodware systems throughout the federal government, instituting foodware systems in cafeterias and cafes and everywhere throughout the federal government, and grants to local governments as well. Reduce single-use plastics again. And it's throughout the federal government as well as grants to local governments on single-use plastics. And further on reuse, promote reuse and repair cafes. EPA collect data on reuse. It's noted that EPA collects data on recycling and waste and compost, but not on reuse. And so there's a direction on one of the initiatives for the EPA to collect data on reuse and do a deep dive on reuse activities across the United States. A new waste reduction, innovation, and recycling market development office within the federal government. a partnership among the federal agencies to work on market development. And recycling, buy recycled compost products, standards on plastic chasing arrows, a national standard on plastic chasing arrows. State of California has an excellent piece of legislation on that. And we're asking the federal government to revisit that issue because it is confusing to the residents across the country. And a global plastics agreement on plastics. Recycling, again, federal waste and recycling contracts. And mentioned pay as you throw on waste and recycling contracts, but also a consolidation of waste and recycling contracts and looking at a reduction of waste and integrating recycling into all those contracts. Use of recycled plastic composite lumber throughout the federal governments, and particularly in the marine environment situations, and national beverage container deposit legislation as a standalone bill for bottle bill, which is being considered throughout the country. And there's major discussions along that pathway. Again, recycling fund market development campaigns and through grants to state governments. Product redesign grant program, looking at upstream redesign of products, and grants to private companies as well as state governments to look at the redesign of problem not hard to recycle products, and looking towards redesigning it for recyclability or compostability. Education and engagement for material quality and optimized recovery, looking at the quality of the material, again, the contamination issues in recycling, and working on education and engagement within the MRFs. And establishment of national standards for a national recycling training program, and working with the states and engagement of that training program, creating a professional training certification program for recycling professionals, national recycling internship program, creating a grants program for internship, and sort of like a national core of interns. On the compost side, building demand for compost, grants and market development program for compost, expanding federal tax deductions for food donation to nonprofits, working with the IRS, strengthening the liability protections for food donation. There's the Good Samaritan Act, but there's a need for strengthening of the liability protections to prevent lawsuits on food donation. Tax credits for farmer food donations. And farmers have a lot of waste on their farmland, problem fruits and vegetables that don't meet the grocer standards, and they need tax credits for donation of these unsightly but still edible foods, and the tax credits route is needed. USDA regional supply chain coordinators. USDA is short on staff in working on with local, regional, and state offices. So there's a need for support within the USDA offices. Guidance on food donation safety. Each state has different health regulations. There's a need for a national guidance document on food donation safety. How do we pay for all these programs? And we have several answers for that question. One answer is a producer responsibility fee, $20 a ton fee on landfills and incinerators across the country. That would generate $3.6 billion a year. That would pay for half of the expenses of all these programs put together. That would also shift the economics calculations throughout the US and make reuse, recycling, and composting more economic. We often see our recycling and composting programs compared to the cost of landfilling, and landfilling being so-called cheap. And landfilling is not always priced accurately at the cost per ton. And adding a $20 per ton cost on landfilling tends to even the playing field a bit. And the national fee on $20 per ton can help pay for these programs that we're proposing. Another way to provide funding for infrastructure is an extended producer responsibility. And many of these programs that we're proposing can be considered extended producer responsibility programs, where the fees are paid for by the producers. They can be self-contained and fully funded programs that do not require federal funds. And we've identified them within our platform, our plan, and they're for difficult to recycle items. And there's numerous programs within our plan, like I said, that are identified. And lastly, the fees for non-recyclable and toxic products. We could create a national fee, like a packaging fee or a non-recyclable fee for single-use products not designed for reuse, recycling, or composting. Plastic Pack has been discussing something similar to that, designed non-recyclable or non-reusable. Revenues dedicated to this plan's plastics and toxics initiatives, it could pay for about a third of this plan's activities. And it could also be used as a market device to phase out these single-use products if a fee is imposed on these non-recyclables and these toxic products. Also in the plan are proposals, 5 proposals within this that I've identified in this plan that eliminate federal subsidies and do not cost the taxpayers any money. They actually reduce funding. There's federal agencies source reduction activities that are identified in this plan. Stopping subsidies for plastic producers would save taxpayers some money. Stop subsidies for chemical recycling. That's, as far as I could research, that would save $27 million a year in federal funding. Stop subsidies to fossil fuel industries, and stop subsidies to mining and extracting of manufacturing. All of these would save money and offset some of the cost of this plan. That will also stimulate alternatives to funding recycling, reuse, reduction, and composting activities. The estimated impacts, I leave that to Jeremy Drake. I hand the baton over to Jeremy to talk about how this plan creates some impacts in our economy.
And before Jeremy starts, I just want to introduce Jeremy.
Yes.
Jeremy is a volunteer for National Recycling Coalition to help on this work. As I mentioned, some of the efforts he's already done. He's someone that's gone through training programs from California Resource Recovery Association, was the lead on developing a zero waste plan for Missoula, Montana, is now working on a zero waste plan for Broomfield, Colorado with a team of zero waste leaders. And we're really fortunate to have Jeremy on our team helping us pull all these details together. So with that as background, here's Jeremy.
Thank you, Gary, and thanks, Bob. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for showing up today. I just wanted to walk you through these numbers and how we got to them. So we wanted to try to assess the job creation and greenhouse gas reduction potential of the initiatives that we're proposing. And the numbers we came up with are, we could create 250,000 jobs and reduce 155 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent. So those are some pretty big numbers. In terms of the methodology, for this initial analysis, we only looked at recycling and composting activities. So an analysis that includes reuse and remanufacturing activities would show additional jobs and additional greenhouse gas reductions. We assumed a 50% capture rate at program maturity. So not necessarily in the first year of these programs, but once they hit their stride, for the 180 million tons per year of discards that the EPA estimates, 50% capture rate we estimated for this calculation. A greater capture rate assumption would result in increased impacts. So in terms of the job creation numbers, we use the 2018 EPA Sustainable Materials Management fact sheet for a materials composition of the discard stream. And so our analysis was materials based. We analyzed jobs data from 4 sources, and in a moment I'll paste those into the chat, but they're from the EPA, from Gaia, from the TELUS Institute, and from the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, who is a key partner for this campaign. We chose to base our analysis on the Institute of Local Self-Reliance data. Their number, which was close to 250,000 jobs, was really close to the average of the 4 different analyses that we did. So we felt that their number was indicative of kind of a fair assumption, middle ground. And Institute of Local Self-Reliance has been and remains to be at the forefront of making the connections between jobs and zero waste. So their work is still as relevant today as it was when it came out. In terms of the greenhouse gas reduction potentials, again, we used the 2018 EPA fact sheet data for composition and did a materials-based analysis. For the greenhouse gas emissions factors for recycling and composting, we used the most recent data from the WARM model, from EPA's WARM. And the number we came up was just over 155 million metric tons. Again, this was only for recycling and composting activities. So if this analysis were to be done in a more detailed fashion with reuse and remanufacturing built into it, then the greenhouse reduction potential would be much greater than what we're seeing here. So with that, I'll pass it back to Ruth Abbey, President of Zero Waste USA, to take us into our Q&A.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeremy. Wanted to now open it up to everyone to provide comments and questions for Bob, for Jeremy, for Gary. We wanted to force kind of talk about it in the big picture first, going down to the details. So we wanted to first find out if there are any questions or comments about what's happening in Congress. Gary went over that at the beginning, and we also have folks who are resources online for that. Then we wanted to find out if there are any questions or comments in general about the plan. And then if you have any suggestions about what could be missing from the plan, and then any changes needed in the plan. And if anybody needs a link to the plan, Gary will put that, I believe, in the chat. So why don't we go ahead and open it up and see, either you can put your question in the chat or raise your hand so that you can unmute. And just let us know if you have any questions or comments about, first, what's happening in Congress. And it's a very lively time for recycling and composting and infrastructure. So any raised hands? And Jeremy, Bob, I think you can stop sharing so we can see everybody on the gallery. There we go. All righty. Not seeing any raised hands. Let's see. Are there any questions in the chat? Jill, do we see?
This is Stephanie. I just put one in there.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and just ask it?
Okay, and I apologize if this ever already been answered, but kind of what is the history with Joe Manchin supporting our recycling plan, and who are the other leads on it that are supporting?
Stephanie, a great question. We're trying to track that down. This just showed up on NRC's desk one day, and we've been asking around about it. One of the things that struck me is the hearing on June 24th of the Senate Energy Environment Committee that he chairs on infrastructure, where he mentioned recycling in that. So it is definitely something that he's been thinking about. But hopefully there's someone else on this call that might have more insight. And if you could raise your hand to respond to this, that would be great. One of the interesting developments in that area, Neil Seldman has highlighted, is the reuse corridor, which has brought together a unique connection of federal, state, and local economic development people promoting reuse in Southern Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia, where Joe Manchin's from. So I don't know, Neil, if you've heard anything about whether they have been advocating with Joe Manchin for this, but if you could just briefly elaborate on what I just said, that would be great.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Gary, and thank you, Jill and Ruth, for coordinating it. It is a great presentation and really stimulating. The Reuse Corridor is having a meeting coming up in the next few days, so I will ask that question. I do not know if they have lobbied or been in touch with the senator. I do know that they're terrific organizers, and if people look into them, and I know, Gary, you're going to invite them to present in an upcoming event with the NRC. That's great, because it's as Gary said, they're coordinating federal, state, and local money, but in addition, they're working with anchor institutions, universities, large companies, European companies investing in polypropylene plastic, for example. So they go from reuse and composting, which are small scale, to international industrial plastics recycling. And this, I just have to add that recently information's coming out, I'm sure we'll all be talking about it, how much energy and pollution savings you get when you make plastic products from recycled plastic as opposed to virgin. So not only are the markets, but the environment is telling us to move ahead quickly with this program. I will report back on what's going on in West Virginia through Gary and Ruth and Bob, and I'm sure we could use their help nationally as well as in West Virginia, because they're a very effective group.
And I think the point could be made to the senator and others that are in kind of a vulnerable period of transition from fossil fuel related jobs to circular economy jobs. And I think there would be a lot of, it would be very compelling for us to bring this information, to the senator and to the others about the just transition is a term that we use quite a bit in going from extractive technologies and polluting technologies into the new economy. And I think we would definitely want to align this program, these initiatives to that vision. So we do have, oh, go ahead, Neil.
Very quickly, excuse me, I wanted to add one other element. They are pointing out that they're not, the towns involved in this, many towns, are not spending more money. They're just spending it differently. Instead of spending it on big companies hauling it away to landfills, they're spending it on reuse, composting, etc. So this is not, this is what the West Virginia economy needs.
Gary, you were going to say?
Yeah, on Ruth's point, that same June 24th hearing had a lot of discussion on mining reclamation and all the reclaiming work that needs to be done from past extractive industries. So it seems like a great connection that would be well worth our whole team to work together on with Senator Manchin.
So a question from John is about, it's a very ambitious plan, Bob, this is directed towards you and probably others in the room, but realistically, what are the chances of its passage? And so that's a question. And I think the other folks who have a lot of experience with federal legislation can tell you sometimes these things are very iterative. They get stuck into other bills, they get stuck into the budget. But did you want to take a first crack at that, Bob?
I'll take first crack, but I'd be willing to bet there's other opinions on the table from more experienced people. I'm the optimist in the crowd. And I take it from two perspectives, the financial and the topic of recycling and composting. The financials, look at the financials. Our proposal is $6.6 billion. The Congress is looking at the first infrastructure package of $900 billion, the very first package. And our proposal is less than 1% of the original package that they're looking at, less than 1%. Our package could be inserted into their package and not make a dent. It's less than 1% of the cost of their package. It could be inserted into their package and it could be part of their original infrastructure package. That's my optimism there. The other part is the topical part, and that's recycling, reuse, reduction, and compost. I don't think these congressmen are thinking this topic in their infrastructure plan, and we believe that recycling is infrastructure too, and we need to get that topic on their plate. And recycling certainly is part of the infrastructure, but it's not in their conversation and needs to be part of their conversation. So I don't think the finances is the problem. I think the topic is the problem. So that's my opinion.
And I would build on what Bob said and Ruth, that what we're trying to do is provide detailed language as to what we want. What we've heard time and time again from the congressional staff that we've talked with in previous webinars hosted by NRC and others, is they keep saying, give us detailed language that you'd like to insert into bills.
That's right.
That's what they need to understand what our needs are. They'll figure out what bills to put them in, and they'll work the politics. That's not going to be, certainly not NRC's strength, or even our whole campaign is not positioned to actually make things happen, so much as we're putting forward our asks, our needs, and the Republicans in Congress have asked for fee-based solutions that would other revenue sources to pay for the infrastructure. And that's why this plan is particularly significant, because we're saying there's multiple ways that it could be funded, and pick which ones feel best to you politically and go for them. And we'll be with you in supporting that. So I think we have a unique opportunity here. There have been other recycling infrastructure bills proposed, like the Recover Act, that was introduced again this year, is all about recycling infrastructure. $500 million is the number that they had in that bill. So it's not something that's at the forefront of the discussion on infrastructure, but we're on the way. And the president finally, final point is, he's looking for a generational investment in infrastructure of how to rebuild our economy for the 21st century for real. And this is totally in keeping with that spirit. So whether we're in this year's infrastructure bill or next year's or the following years, in Congress, it takes time to get things to the fore. This is our big push this year because it feels right. And all the infrastructure projects could use reuse systems, recycled content, and compost products. So if there's nothing else we get out of this year's infrastructure bill, it would be good to get that one sentence somewhere in the bills about eligible for grant funding are the use of reuse systems, recycled content products, and compost products. That would have a huge impact on those infrastructure projects, helping advance our industry.
We have a couple of questions coming up from Christina and Carla, but before we go to those, I wanted to just check and see if there are any folks in the room who are a little closer to the Hill, have active lobbying organizations that wanted to weigh in on John's question about how likely is something like this to get into legislation? Did you want to expand on anything that Bob or Gary said about getting specific language into specific bills and that are moving? Anybody? Just you can unmute if you have an idea. And if not, we'll just go with
Bob's
what
got his
Bob
hand
says.
up. Bob's
Go ahead,
got
Bob.
his hand up.
Yeah, just for clarification, I may not have mentioned it in my presentation, but Gary hinted at it. But I just want to be more direct. And that is the plan that I was referring to and reading a few clips from. Each of the 50 initiatives has very, very specific language, as Gary was noted, very specific language that they could pick up and put into legislation. And so we are suggesting to Congress very direct language that could be legislative language for all 50 initiatives. So I just wanted to be more direct on that statement.
So the next question, I think it could be very much related to that, was for Christina about if you want support from state recycling organizations. And the answer is absolutely yes. And the question is how. And so I wanted to first reiterate something that we discussed prior to the prior congressional break, which was that when the legislators are home for their August break, you should be asking for meetings with them or their staff and coming to them with specific language for bills that you would like to see them either become co-authors of or to support or to explain why in your area recycling infrastructure is so important for jobs, et cetera, et cetera. They will all have earmarks. They will all have opportunities to weigh in. And so if we can get those meetings during the August break, it would make a huge difference, so not everybody needs to meet with everybody, but if you know that your legislators are on key committees, I think this is really very much of a bipartisan opportunity as well, because every state in the country, every congressional district needs a recycling infrastructure. So I think that if you can activate your members on the state, either the state recycling organization can ask for those meetings yourself, or you can activate your members to do that. After this meeting, I think the steering committee might put together a little package of the ask. Here would be the letter, here would be the link to the draft plan, and then get those meetings and get that organized with those, because there's nothing like hearing from the actual constituents. Coming from national organizations is great, but coming from your district is better. So I just want to put that out there before I hand it over to Bob and Gary. Did you want to add on anything in terms of what state recycling organizations can do?
I would say that at this point, you're right on target, Ruth, as always, as the number one priority. But the second thing is a simpler thing for state recycling organizations to do, which is to sign on to the Biden-Harris letter that initiated this whole campaign back in March 31, is when that was sent in, with about 150 organizations signing on to that. We also converted that into a change.org petition, which would be good for you to get out to your members for more general public support. The Biden-Harris letter, March 31, was calling for these types of things and other types of things as well that would support our industry. And we'll put in the chat the link to that Biden-Harris letter that initiated the campaign. Neil?
Thanks. The support from the state recycling organizations are, of course, essential, but there are other great networks, environmental groups, certainly local Sierra clubs and state Sierra clubs, as well as many zero waste groups. So support for what we're talking about at the state and federal level will garner a lot of sign-ons, if you will, from like-minded organizations, even though they're not directly related to recycling.
A great point. And the National Recycling Coalition's proposed strategic plan, we encourage the state recycling organizations to work with environmental groups, particularly those that are fighting single-use plastics and those issues, because that's where a lot of the energy is coming in our movement today for legislative change. So if the state recycling organizations join together with the environmental groups like they did in Colorado this year, they were able to get major legislation through in Colorado that they had tried to get through before, but they hadn't been coalescing. They hadn't been working together on those bills. When they came together this year with a very strategic approach, they were able to get through a major advance in the legislation. So,
yeah, Gary, if we could, I just want to say what it is. They got the state to repeal the state preemption against local activity, which, as we all know, is quite a big thing. So hats off to those folks.
The next question is from Carla about how to stay updated on the plan and the legislation. And I think that I'm not sure if NRC or Zero Waste USA or ILSR has a dedicated page on the website that is for this, but perhaps that's something we should do. I can volunteer, Zero Waste USA to come up with a dedicated webpage that folks don't have to look for emails or find Google Drives, but that would probably be easier for folks if we just put a dedicated section on our webpage. Maybe all three organizations can do that.
Yeah, we'll coordinate with you on that. It's a good idea.
All right. Carla, was there anything else you wanted to add or ask about that, keeping updated? We, of course, will be sending out email links and reminders to the folks that have registered for these webinars, the folks that are on the organizing committee, and the folks that have been participating who are new. We will be sending out links and agendas and announcing the next webinar where we'll come together in August. Do you want to add something? Go ahead.
I just want to highlight that we are doing these webinars monthly. That was what we set out to do when we met in May as one of the ideas, and the organizing committee embraced that as probably one of the most important things for us to do. So these webinars are supposed to be laser focused on what's happening in DC. It's not in general. It's all about what's happening in DC, about infrastructure and the types of things that you just heard about in the American Recycling Infrastructure Plan. Their next webinar is August 24th. We're inviting our other members of the organizing committee to host webinars. Today was hosted by NRC with support from greeneducation.us. Next month will be hosted by Institute for Local Self-Reliance. Other organizations have expressed some interest. If you would like to host one of these monthly webinars, again, focused on recycling infrastructure updates on what's going on, that would be good. We also have sessions scheduled at the Resource Recycling Conference in 2 weeks. On August 4th, there'll be a session that NRC organized for addressing these issues there. And the National Recycling Congress that's scheduled for November 3 and 4 supported by NYSAR, the New York State Association for Reduction, Reuse, and Recycling. Our partner there, we'll be having Recycling's Infrastructure 2 sessions at that event. So we have these monthly webinars from the campaign, and then we're seeking other opportunities to get the word out. One or more of us from the steering committee would be available to speak at other events that you organize. Just email us and we'll be happy to respond.
Stephanie had an additional question or comment. Stephanie, do you want to go ahead?
I have a couple just on the website. I think it would be very critical to have a timeline for the rest of the year for, when Congress and what's going on, because like you said, August is a critical time for all of us. They're home, we can get them and listen to them. And with that, Gary, and I'll finish my statement and then you can answer this. But I think it would be great to just have a public webinar and us just invite everybody we can think of to it. You know, True can host it if we want, or we can just help get the word out. I think there's lots of individuals and other groups that, especially with the month of August, just seeing that presentation you had, these are your 4 actions we want you to do, and just really get the buzz going, because a lot of these other groups and individuals are going to their elected officials for other issues too, and they can just add this on. Have you heard about it? Are you talking about it? And then just for language, I totally agree that we need to be very powerful about stopping subsidies, but I'm wondering if there's a way to soften that language and actually talk more about shifting or redirecting subsidies. And I think it's kind of a great time because some of these subsidies are no longer needed, if you will, like the pipeline was shut down. So that was a huge, you know, who knows what subsidies were going there, taking those subsidies from the pipeline and the coal mining that's being reduced and shifting those to a new, more productive, more job creating economy.
Gary or Bob, did you want to address any of Stephanie's questions or comments? Neil, looks like you want to address that.
I just want to add a comment that going back to the early 70s, what Stephanie just described was one of the earliest requests that small towns in New Hampshire, where this comes from, should get the equivalent of a depletion allowance for recovery of metal and other resources, exactly like the depletion allowances that the big corporations get. So this is an idea that has now come back after 50 years, thanks to you, Stephanie.
Well, and we're calling it now the producer responsibility fee. It's a $20 a ton fee on landfills and incinerators. And incinerators are anything above 212 degrees Fahrenheit. So whether it's called a green fee, a producer responsibility fee, others, getting the language right is important. So shifting subsidies, redirecting subsidies. We're always looking for polishing up our language. So thank you for that idea. Love for us to work with you on a true webinar. We had intended to be more increasingly public oriented rather than the professionals that we were focused on. Our initial work was to get the people who were at the table in DC. That's who we are referring to as the organizing committee. So SWANA and ISRI and National League of Cities, U.S. Conference of Mayors, World Wildlife Fund, Sierra Club. These are all groups that that have lobbyists at the table that are working every day in DC on these types of issues. And our goal was to coalesce them so that we were all knowing what each other was doing and could bring everyone together to advocate for the whole package as much as they could when they were going around meeting with folks. So that was our initial phase, but we definitely want to get much more public and get the troops and the grassroots behind these efforts. And I think we now have enough meat on or vegetables on the table to go forward with that.
And their advice to us was to plan these meetings with the legislators, because it's always better to hear from the actual constituents. So do we have other questions or comments from folks in general, in specific? A lot of this has been about sort of the general process and plan. Did anybody have any specific feedback about the plan itself, either amendments or changes? Stephanie had made some suggestions in terms of language. So would there be anybody that wants to unmute? Would you have any reaction to anything that you heard when Bob went over the basic pieces of the plan? Anything missing? Or things that you felt really need changed? And you could take some time and take a look at the draft plan and always giving us feedback offline. But if you want to just, anybody have any immediate reaction, that would be good.
I saw
Is that
Bob
Monica?
Monica
Bob
raised
was
her hand.
nominated to be czar, but
Yes.
I'm not sure we have that position.
Second that.
Well, if I could
But-
say, if the United States has to lose its democracy, I'd rather Bob be the czar than anyone else.
Monica, did you want to say?
I just wanted
some
to make a
reactions?
general statement of like how excited I am about this overall systems approach, and how you've really included so much upstream efforts as well as cost projections and income potential and job creation numbers and all of that. So I just wanted to thank everyone for working on it. I think it's going to be really helpful.
Yeah, so in response to Christine about doing a bunch of webinars to expand this, I think that's a really good idea. So we've been kind of intentionally incremental. First with our organizing committees, kind of getting our act together, understanding everybody's piece of the elephant that they feel out there in the federal government and in DC. And now that we have more of more to offer and some specific advice from the lobbying organizations, I think it would be good to offer another webinar. Stephanie has agreed to host, and so maybe early August we can get something out related to the specific instructions for individuals who would like to take the American Recycling Investment Plan and help to incorporate that into the American Recycling Investment Act and the other pieces of legislation and budget items and infrastructure package that are being developed in DC. I think the more that your congressmen, women, and senators hear from us, the more likely we will get to see that specific language in different bills. So that we'll take that as an action item for the steering committee to put that package together that you can then send out to your members, and then to schedule a meeting, maybe specifically on how to get a meeting with your congressperson, how to meet with your senator staff, and the specific ask that we would ask you to do if you get those meetings. Okay, so other questions or comments?
I'll just go to the closing while others are thinking about it. The next steps for the campaign so far was the next webinar on a national bottle bill. This is something that is included in our plan. We understand is in the process of being developed a standalone bill building off of language in the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act that the people who have been working on that bill are working on a standalone bottle bill, beverage container deposit bill, that'll be introduced probably within the next several weeks, is what we've heard. And so because that's a high priority for getting quality materials, but needs to be structured right to get the maximum benefits, Institute for Local Self-Reliance has proposed and is hosting the next webinar on August 24th at the same time, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, to have a number of speakers on the national bottle bill idea.
And Neil, can your folks put the link to the registration in the chat?
I'm working remotely, so I can't do that, but I will get it. I will get that to you, Ruth, if you could put it up in a few hours. But I did want to say that we are planning, and we're developing with Gary's help, a survey to send out to participants who will be in that August 24th meeting, just to get a sense of some of the issues surrounding bottle bills and what features people might like or dislike from a national bottle bill. So I will get that the survey out after Gary and I have finished editing, and I will also get the links to you, Ruth, for that from Jesse on our staff.
Okay, send it to Jill, because Jill will be sending
Jill.
out the note to all the attendees from today.
Okay, I will do that. Thank you.
The Container Recycling Institute, we know, is working on developing recommendations for that. The National Stewardship Action Council, Heidi Sanborn's working with them. One of the key advocates has been Representative Lowenthal from California, where Heidi is based. So she's been working actively with them. And we understand they'll be doing their own webinars highlighting what are best practices and what should be in a national bottle bill. We understand may be part of their webinars. The focus for the ILSR will be looking on key issues that really need to be addressed, that we've learned lessons from the 10 bottle bills around the country and some lessons from overseas, to make sure we get it as right as we can, or at least know what we want. You don't always get what you want in legislation, but it's really hard if you're not clear about some of the hot topic issues. So that'll be the focus of the webinar. We are aware that there's research going on best practices for national bottle bills, and we're trying to get someone to talk about that research as well.
Great. Well, anything else for today in terms of from the participants or from the organizing committee or the steering committee?
I'd just like to thank greeneducation.us for hosting again. Jill, you're always a pleasure to work with, and appreciate all your expertise in back of the house issues, and doing your great training on certified sustainable resource management professionals that you offer online. For our steering committee, National Recycling Coalition, Zero Waste USA, and Institute for Local Self-Reliance. This is really important work we're all doing, and appreciate everyone's efforts. So, and for all the attendees, we had about 80 registered. The high ISO was 50 at 11:30 Pacific time, which is about normal for registration versus attending. So I think it's really great to see all of you, and look forward to working with you to really move this forward together, to actually get something done in Congress. So thank you.
Thank you, Gary, and everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Notes, links to the slides and the recording and registration will be forthcoming.